Hey guys, so this poem is called Originally by Carol Ann Duffy. And so, just to give you a little background information about the poem, it's actually a sort of autobiographical poem because Duffy's kind of she wrote this poem based off of her experiences of moving from Scotland to England when she was 5 or 6 years old, and it becomes very evident throughout the poem. And I'll point out the sections where you can tell. So the first three actually the poem's broken up into three stanzas, and so the first one kind of talks about them actually moving, the family. The second one kind of talks about the difficulties faced by the child in the poem after she had moved, and then the last one kind of talks about how the child has realized that she has kind of lost her identity from her original home country, and she doesn't really know who she identifies herself with anymore. So it's broken up into these three parts. So the first stanza kind of introduces you to the whole scene, especially the first three lines. They kind of create the setting. They talk about how this we, which is the family, they came from their own country and they're going to the turn of the wheels. So you know that they're basically moving because they're saying we came from our own country to the turn of the wheels. So you can assume that it's in a car. And then the red room that they're in um, basically also shows that they're in a car, assuming that the red room is a car. But at the same time, the red can also, um, red itself symbolizes anger, and so it kind of shows the um, the girl's anger towards moving because she really doesn't want to, and as any child wouldn't want to move. And then the second part of this first two lines, fell through the fields, could mean like one of two things. So it could mean like the falling through the fields could kind of signify like them driving from Scotland to England and like driving by the fields or falling through them. But at the same time, it could also show the fact that like she fell is kind of something you can't control, and this move that like she's moving from Scotland to England is also something she can't control because it's her parents' decision. So saying that they fell through the fields kind of just shows this lack of control that she feels in this whole situation. Then this next part, our mother singing our father's name, this is kind of very separate, like very different from the rest of the poem. It's kind of juxtaposed because um this kind of has like a very optimistic and merry kind of tone to it compared to the rest of the poem where it's or like the rest of the stanza where she's very sad and upset that they have to move and her brothers are crying and bawling. So it's very very different from the other, and I think it kind of just shows how the parents know the new opportunities they could experience in the new country they're going to, while the kids don't understand that. They just see it as another change in their life which they don't want to happen, like losing all of their friends. So it's kind of like the difference in maturity between the two, and at the same time it's also just yeah. um okay. And so then this next part where the brothers are crying and bawling saying home, home, home is repeated here, and I think it just emphasizes the sadness they kind of feel and like how they want to go back, but then later on um she very clearly states that like vacant rooms where we didn't live anymore. So it's like the brothers want to go home to a place where there is no home anymore. And then she kind of personifies the Miles here, kind of just to emphasize how badly they want to go back, saying like the Miles rushed back to the city, kind of showing like how far they've driven and how like they rush back to the city, going from the street to the house to the vacant rooms where they don't live anymore. But in reality, it's much further than that. There is no rushing back because they're not going to go back there again. And then at the end of the stanza, she stares into the eyes of a blind toy, and the fact that the toy's blind kind of symbolizes how she feels in this whole situation because she's blind. She has no idea what she's not getting herself into, but she has no idea what's ahead of her, like what her new life could be. So she feels very blind, just like the toy. And then she says she's holding its paw. So this is one of many times that the poem kind of shows that it's being written from the point of view of a child, because the fact that they use his paw rather than hand is something that it's something that a child could relate to, because a paw, like the paw to her toy, assuming that it's a bear. And I think it just shows like it just brings a sense of security and comfort to her, like holding its paw rather than its hand. Um, then this next stanza starts with a very mature idea for a 6-year old, which is why I think it kind of steers away from that idea for a second but it comes right back to it. But basically, it says all childhood is an emigration, and this is one of the most important lines of the poem because it kind of like summarizes the whole like theme of the poem in that like all of childhood is constant change from one aspect to the next. You go from like living at home to going to first to like elementary school to middle school to high school. Your friends are constantly changing. Every aspect of your life is constantly changing, and even biologically. So I think that's basically it kind of just introduces you to the idea that like she's slowly beginning to change here. So when she says some are slow, when she's talking about change, some being slow, this line she uses very the way she writes this line, she uses many commas and she makes it very long and lengthy to show how this line is slow, just like the change she's talking about. And then it's very strongly contrasted in the next two lines where she says others are sudden and then she has a period, your accent wrong. So these next two lines are very sudden, just like she said some changes can be. So by saying accent, your accent is wrong, she's talking about her own accent, like other people telling her her accent is wrong. And I think that kind of shows that she's coming from Scotland, so it reinforces the idea that like this poem is about her moving as a child because um her Scottish accent would be very different from those British ones or the English accents that she would be surrounded by after she moved. And so it'd be only usual for other kids to tell her that her accent was wrong. And it's just another way that she feels like she doesn't belong in this new place that she is having to live in now. So it just reinforces that idea. And then like it continues on when she says corners which seem familiar, leading to unimaginable pebble-dashed estates. So it's just another part where she feels like she knows this place, but then again she realizes that it's just none of it's familiar to her. Unimaginable pebble-dashed estates are just like it kind of like lets you paint a picture of what this new place could be like where she's living now. Then these big boys eating worms and shouting words you don't understand. These big boys are kind of like I think they're symbolic because they're very saying big boys is pretty ambiguous, but I think it's symbolic for like the kids that she meets at school that she doesn't relate to, that she can't become friends with because they do things that she would never do, like eating worms. Although this may be a bit of an exaggeration because she's a child and eating worms isn't something that even boys would do. But I think it kind of just furthers the idea that she feels completely like different from everyone else at in her new life, and that they're all doing like unusual things and she doesn't fit in, and the shouting words you don't understand part. So I took this to be like the big boy saying cuss words and she just didn't understand them, but it could also be the fact that she is now in a new country and they have different like words or different like sayings that she wouldn't understand, and so she just it's again it just furthers the idea that she doesn't think that she fits in to this whole new culture, and she's having a very difficult time like transitioning. And it's not just her. She talks about how her parents' anxiety stirs like a loose tooth in my head. So this is another one of those times where you can like Duffy uses this simile, like a loose tooth, to show that the poem is being written from a 6 year old or a 5 year old, like a child basically, because loose teeth are something that a problem that children have to face. And so comparing something to that would be something that a child would do because like once you get old enough, you kind of forget what it's like to have a loose tooth. And so by using this simile, it just reinforces that idea. And saying I want our own country again kind of ties back to the beginning where I want our own country, just the sense of like togetherness she had felt at her old country and how she doesn't feel like she fits in anymore. Okay. And then this last stanza is kind of a shift in the poem, and you can tell it's a shift because she starts off by saying but. So the but signifies this. And she says, but then you forget or don't recall or change. So you can already tell that her whole idea of from the beginning of the poem to this line here is all completely changed. Because now it's not that she's not saying that she forgot, but she's changed. And that she now like so here she says like seeing your brother swallow a slug, you feel only a scalp of shame. So this swallowing the slug ties straight back into the big boys who eat bugs. And basically, what she's saying is that her brother is now completely integrated himself into this new culture because he swallows slugs too. He does anything that boys his age would do, and it kind of just shows it. And she only feels a scalp of shame, so like a little bit of shame, even though she should probably feel more, considering the fact that eating swallowing a slug isn't the most delightful thing to do. But I think it also kind of shows that she herself has become used to this, that the boys swallow bugs, that's just what they do. And then she uses skelf here, and this word is very important because it's actually Scottish for splinter. And the fact that she's still using Scottish words shows that she hasn't herself completely, um, she hasn't completely, like her brother, integrated herself into this new culture, and she's still trying to grasp on to aspects of her old life, and it's kind of like a nostalgic feeling she gets, which is why she uses the word skelf. And so that kind of brings about the idea that she's uncertain of who she identifies herself with, because she still wants to have the Scottish ties, but at the same time, her whole personality has changed. Like when she says later on, she says, "I remember my tongue shedding its skin like a snake, my voice in the classroom sounding just like the rest." So this is basically saying she no longer has her accent. So parts of her identity are just like slowly like disappearing. And here again, she uses another simile that only a child would use, talking about shedding its skin. Like kids obviously play with snakes or are scared of them, so it's something that they can relate to. And saying that her tongue is shedding its skin is basically saying her accent is leaving, and she's probably taking on the British or the English accent. Oh, and then here as well, swallowing a slug in Skelf of Shame, this alliteration here, it kind of just enhances the oral aspect of the poem, and she also does it again later on where she says speech, sense of first space. The S sound, it just enhances this oral aspect because we know that Duffy puts a large emphasis on like poems being spoken out loud, and so by using this alliteration, it kind of just lets the poem like flow off of your tongue. Then at the end of the poem, she asks a question, and it's basically asking a question of like whether or not she's lost all of these aspects of like her culture, her speech, her sense of like place. And the fact that it's in a question kind of just demonstrates the idea that she is uncertain of what the answer is. She can't actually answer it because she doesn't know if she's lost it or if she doesn't really know whether she's completely lost her old culture or if she's taken on a new one. And so she's kind of torn between the two. And that's why at the very end, when she says now, someone asks her where she comes from, when she says originally and she can't answer, she hesitates because she doesn't really know. And that's basically the whole purpose of this poem, the fact that as a child you don't really have any, like, not that you don't have a sense of identity, but it's constantly changing, so it's very difficult to feel like you have a sense of identity, which is why she had said here childhood is an emigration, because it's a constant change, so your identity is almost like it's changing. And so, oh, and then one last thing. This last stanza, one thing you notice is that she suddenly changed from saying our and we and like our own country to I. And I think that's because she feels like the rest of her family has moved on, like her brother is swallowing slugs, and her parents that were happy from the beginning that they were moving. So she feels like the rest of her family has moved on and forgotten about their past, but she still feels ties to it. And she's the only one, which is why she says, I lost, I only think, I only. All of these things kind of just show, like, bring about the idea that, like, she feels like she's alone in this. So basically, I feel like what Duffy's trying to say with this poem is that growing up is essentially synonymous with change. Okay, thank you for listening.